There are people who think they can do whatever they want, that the world revolves around them, that any obstacle in the way can be removed just because they've decided to do so. This woman, she was exactly that kind of person. It all started when I bought this house. It was nothing fancy, nothing gaudy, just a little corner of peace away from unbearable neighbors. At least, that's what I thought. Until I discovered that this woman controlled the neighborhood like a medieval fiefdom. She was part of the dreaded HOA, that neighborhood association that theoretically serves to maintain order in the neighborhood, but in practice only serves to give power to people with dictator complexes. It didn't take long for her to show up, already in my first week living there. She arrived with that air of superiority, holding a clipboard as if she were about to hand me a court summons. The conversation was short. Basically, she wanted me to change the color of the fence, cut the grass to a specific height, and remove my truck from the driveway because it wasn't in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. I smiled, said a polite no, and closed the door in her face. That's when the war began. First came the notices, then the written warnings. When she saw that I simply ignored every attempt to impose her crazy rules, she started to get more aggressive. I began to notice her car parked near my house frequently. It was as if she was waiting for me to slip up, to make the slightest mistake so that she could attack. The icing on the cake was when I decided to change the front gate. The old one was fragile, any little push, and it would topple like wet cardboard. Since I like to do things the right way, I had a new, reinforced gate installed, with steel on the inside. Beautiful, discreet, and above all, impossible to knock down without a battle tank. Sounds like an irrelevant detail, but the woman simply hated it. The following week, she already had an official notice from the HOA saying that the gate was not in compliance with community standards and that it needed to be removed. I had to laugh. Oh, so now quality gates were forbidden too? I took the notice and threw it straight in the garbage can. That must have made her froth with rage, because it was from then on that she started walking in front of my house more often, always looking at the gate with a look like she was about to commit an atrocity. And he did. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen drinking coffee when I heard a louder than normal engine roar. It wasn't just any car. It was the woman's SUV. And before I could understand what was happening, I saw the most absurd scene I've ever witnessed. She slammed her foot down on the accelerator and drove straight into my gate. The noise of the crash was so loud that it echoed throughout the neighborhood. But there was one detail. The gate wasn't broken, but her car? Oh, that one crumpled like a soda can. If I said I was surprised by what happened, I'd be lying. This woman had such an obsession with control that, frankly, it was only a matter of time before she did something absolutely insane. But I confess that not even in my best daydreams did I imagine that she would come up with the brilliant idea of ramming her own car into my gate. Now, put me in your place for a moment. You're at home, enjoying your morning, having a quiet coffee, when suddenly, bam! A noise worthy of a Hollywood action scene explodes outside. You run to see what's happened, and there she is, sitting in the driver's seat, with the car stuck in the gate like an insect crushed in the windshield. The scene was a masterpiece of chaos. Her SUV's hood was folded up like a piece of aluminum foil. The front bumper was practically non-existent, and one of the headlights had been left hanging, flashing as if the car was trying to call for help. And the gate? The gate didn't even move. The woman, on the other hand, was possessed. She slammed the car door open, stomped hard on the ground, and turned to me with an expression of pure indignation, as if I was the one in the wrong. She shook herself like a wet dog and, with her hands on her hips, let out a scream. That was sabotage! Sabotage! Let me get this straight. She decides to accelerate a car, weighing almost 2 tons against my property, breaks her own vehicle in the process, and I'm the saboteur? All I could do was cross my arms and watch her, waiting anxiously for the crazy justification that would follow. This gate shouldn't be so sturdy. You reinforced it illegally. I almost choked with laughter. What exactly did she expect? That I would install a styrofoam gate? This isn't safe, she continued, hitting the metal with her open hand. You could have caused a serious accident. I looked around, hoping that some neighbor would come out and confirm that I was hearing it right. But apparently, it was just me and her craziness at the moment. The woman started pacing back and forth, snorting, probably trying to find a way to turn this into a situation where she would be the victim. But, let's face it, crashing a car into a gate isn't exactly a mistake you can throw at others. The best moment was when she finally stopped, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath, as if she was preparing to say something extremely intelligent. And then, with all the certainty in the world, she let it out. It's not going to stay like this. I'm going to call the police. Yes, you read that right. She wanted to call the police. I swear, for a second I thought I'd heard wrong. But no, she actually pulled out her cell phone and dialed, probably expecting the officers to come running to arrest me for having a working gate. Things started to get even better when, finally, the neighbors started coming out of the house. First Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door, with her fluffy bathrobe and a cup of tea in her hand. Then Mr. Martinez, who just crossed his arms and watched the scene with an amused twinkle in his eye. Soon, a few more people appeared, forming a small crowd around what could only be described as the most hilarious spectacle of the morning. The car was still there, a monument to failure, while the woman screamed into the phone, trying to explain the inexplicable. It was then that I realized that she had also noticed the audience, and suddenly her posture changed. If before she had been furious, now she was trying to look like a wronged victim. She turned to her neighbors and, in the most dramatic tone possible, began to speak. That gate is a threat to the whole community. It could have hurt someone. Look what happened to my car. Mrs. Peterson took a sip of her tea and arched an eyebrow. Your car hit the gate, not the other way around. That was an accident caused by negligence, she insisted. This time, it was Mr. Martinez who answered. The only accident here was your decision to speed into a metal gate. At that, some of the neighbors laughed. And do you know what happens when people like this woman realize they're being ridiculed? They go into full denial mode. Help arrived a few minutes later. A policeman and a tow truck because, well, her car wasn't going anywhere without help. The policeman got out of his vehicle with that "this is going to ruin my day" expression and came straight over to us. What happened here? Before I could answer, the woman practically jumped forward. Officer, this man illegally reinforced the gate to his house. My car crashed and look what happened. This can't be allowed here. The officer looked at her. He looked at the wrecked car. He looked at the intact gate. Then he looked at her again. And then, in the most tired voice in the world, he asked, "Did you hit his gate on purpose?" She widened her eyes, as if it was absurd that the question had even been asked. That's not the point. The point is that this gate is dangerous. The policeman sighed. He had already understood everything. Madam, what's dangerous here is speeding a car against a fixed object. If his gate complies with the law, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The problem here is you. That's it. Silence fell like lightning. The woman was speechless for the first time since this soap opera began. While the policeman finished filling in the reports, I just leaned back against the fence, satisfied. My gate had expired. Her car? Not so much. If there's one thing these people can't stand, it's being contradicted. Even worse, being humiliated in public. And this woman? Well, she had just suffered one of the biggest embarrassments of her life. The scene was still there, like a monument to absolute failure. The wrecked car, the tow truck preparing to take away the remains of the SUV, the policeman with that look of boredom filling out the paperwork, and the neighbors watching everything as if it were a live episode of a reality show. But of course, she wasn't going to accept defeat so easily. When she saw that she couldn't convince the police that I was the villain in the story, she decided to change tactics. Suddenly, the explosive indignation gave way to a new approach: the role of victim. I've sacrificed so much to keep this community in order, and look how I'm being treated. I looked at the neighbors, waiting to see if anyone was going to fall for it. The silence said it all. The woman continued her dramatic speech, holding her forehead, as if she was about to faint right there in the middle of the street. I just wanted a nice, safe neighborhood. And now this, my car, my reputation. I was tempted to say that the only thing that was really bruised there was her ego, but I decided to keep quiet and just enjoy the show. The policeman had no patience left. "Ma'am, the only reason your car is in this state is because you accelerated it against a fixed gate. This is considered destruction of private property and could result in criminal charges." Ah, the icing on the cake. If before she was in suffering victim mode, now the woman has activated absolute panic mode. What? This is ridiculous. I'm a respected leader in this community. "You can't do this to me," the policeman sighed and continued to fill in the report as if he was used to this kind of theater. Meanwhile, one of the tow truck drivers, a burly guy in his 50s, who looked like he'd seen it all, looked at her car and shook his head. "You did a good job wrecking this place, huh, lady? I've never seen such ugly damage caused by sheer stupidity." I almost choked with laughter inside. Her face turned as red as a tomato. "This is harassment," she shouted, looking around, trying to find someone who cared. Nobody cared. The winch started to lift the car, and it was at that moment that I realized that the woman really didn't have a plan B. She thought she was going to come here, put on her show, come off as a hero, and maybe even make me break down my gate of my own accord. But now, she'd only sunk further. It was then, as a last-ditch attempt to save herself, that she pulled out her cell phone and started typing frantically. I could bet she was posting something like, "I am the victim of an absurd injustice. Community against me. Corrupt police." Because, of course, when reality isn't in their favor, these people always appeal to the court of the internet. Her problem? Everyone there saw exactly what happened. And you want to know the best part? One of the neighbors recorded the whole thing. Yes, the woman tried to launch an alternative narrative online, but the truth was just a click away. Mr. Martinez, the one who watched everything with his arms crossed, smiled and raised his cell phone. "If anyone wants to see the reality, I recorded it all, including the moment when she accelerates straight into the gate." And there was the final blow. Her face contorted in sheer despair as she realized there was nowhere left to run. But still, even after all this public humiliation, she tried one last trick. She turned to me, pointed a trembling finger, and let go. "This isn't over yet. You don't understand who you're dealing with." Of course, the classic, "You'll regret it," from someone who has already lost and just doesn't want to admit it. I did my best to hold in my laughter and just gave a lazy nod. "Good luck with that." She snorted, spun on her heels, and got into an Uber that appeared like a miracle to rescue what was left of her dignity. Meanwhile, the police officer finished his report and handed me a copy. "If you need to file a lawsuit for damages or trespassing, here's everything documented." But honestly, I think public humiliation was punishment enough. I agreed. But I knew this woman wasn't going to let it go, because people like that, when they lose, don't accept it. And I was sure she was still going to try something. If there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that some people just don't know how to lose. It doesn't matter how ridiculous their actions have been, how humiliated they've been, or how much everyone around them has made it clear that they're wrong. Some just can't accept reality. And this woman? She was the classic case. After the car fiasco, the visit from the police, and the public humiliation, any normal person would have retreated into their own insignificance, rethought their life choices, and moved on. But her? Over the next few days, I realized that something was strange. The first clue came when I received an official notice from the HOA saying that my gate was in serious violation of community guidelines and needed to be removed immediately. It was almost funny. Did she really think that after ramming an SUV into my gate and going through all that embarrassment, I was just going to comply with an order coming from the very association she controlled? I took the paper, crumpled it up, and threw it straight in the trash. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, little things started to happen. One day, I woke up to find an infringement notice stuck to my door. Then fines started coming in from the HOA for inadequate property maintenance, and my house was better looked after than any other on the street. And then came the reports from the neighbors. Apparently, she was going door to door, telling the story of how I was a problem resident and was destroying the community spirit of the neighborhood. The best part? Nobody believed her. The video of the accident had already been circulated among the neighbors. Everyone knew what had really happened, but she still insisted. At the height of her desperation, she went so far as to schedule an emergency HOA meeting to discuss legal action against my illegal gate. And me? Well, I went. If there's one thing I've learned throughout my life, it's that when someone wants to take you down, the worst mistake you can make is to turn your back and walk away. So I showed up at that meeting, sat in the front row, and waited for her to start her little show. And my God, what a show! She stood up in front of everyone, paperwork in hand, and started making speeches as if she were leading a revolution. This neighborhood has always been a place of respect, where we follow the rules and maintain order. But now, we're facing a serious problem. A resident has decided to install a gate that is a real risk to the safety of us all. He put his hands on his chest as if he were holding back a dramatic cry. "You saw what happened to my car. I could have been seriously injured. What if it had been a child? What if it had been an elderly person? This gate is a tragedy waiting to happen." At this point, you could hear some bored sighs in the audience. Even the most loyal HOA members were clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't notice. She continued her speech, as if she were the neighborhood's last hope, until a voice from the back of the room cut through the silence. The lady crashed her car into his gate on purpose. That was Mr. Martinez. And now you want us to believe that it was his fault? I'm sorry, but this is already ridiculous. And that's when everything started to fall apart for good. Other neighbors began to murmur. Some shook their heads. One older lady even let out a quiet, "For heaven's sake." And then Mrs. Peterson, the one who always watched everything with her cup of tea, raised her hand. "I just wanted to understand one thing. If the gate is so dangerous, why was it your car that broke down, and not it?" The woman turned red. She opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. For the first time, she realized that no one there was buying her story. It was beautiful. The meeting quickly got out of hand. People started talking about how tired they were of the way the HOA was run, how the woman was calling the shots without consulting anyone. One guy in the background even suggested that she be removed from office. And that's when the final blow came. One of the oldest members of the HOA, a bespectacled man who looked like he'd seen more absurdities than he cared to in his life, snorted and said, "Actually, we looked at the association's bylaws, and his gate is completely within the rules. If anyone here is in breach, it's not him." Total silence. The woman swallowed. I tried to hold back a smile, but it was difficult. And then, to top it all off, Mr. Martinez, who had clearly had enough, looked directly at her and said, "Maybe it's time you stopped trying to control everyone and worried more about your own problems. Like, for example, your new car." The final blow. She huffed, grabbed the papers, turned on her heels, and left the meeting without saying another word. And so ended the reign of the woman who thought she could bring down a steel gate with the sheer force of arrogance. For the next few days, the silence was absolute. No new fines, no notifications, nothing. It was as if she had finally accepted defeat. Or maybe she was just licking her wounds. The important thing was that the gate was still standing. Her car, on the other hand, well, that was never seen again. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.